I think the whole idea was poorly planned. Is there an issue with feral cattle? Yes. But to what magnitude? I think it's minuscule compared to the feral horse problem that we have in New Mexico, to the massive elk populations that we have in New Mexico. That is what is deteriorating the streams, the quality of streams, the grazing of the animals. It's these massive elk herds that we have. It's the fact that we have entered into a treaty with New Mexico to the numbers of wild horses we'll keep. But wild horses are the darling of the American spirit. So we look by that. But if you see the damage that these wild horses, because the numbers have gotten so great, have done to our environment, and we look at basically a handful of cattle, but right now, because of the environmentalists, because of the green people are just looking at cattle as a bad animal. But yet they never came to the Cattle Growers Association. They never reached out to the people in those environments and said, let's sit down. What can we do? They can have ranchers go out there. Even if they slaughter those cattle, they'll be prepared to load them. They'll have their tractors there, load them cattle, get them to the butcher, get them to be processed, and that meat can be donated. So I think that this was extremely poorly thought out. They didn't discuss it with the community. They didn't discuss it with the groups that care. Nobody cares for the environment more than the cattle industry, than the cattleman, because he's gonna go back there year after year after year and put them cattle on there to graze. And so he's going to take care of that because those permits allow him to stay in business. And the Forest Service has a history in New Mexico of working against the cattlemen of New Mexico. They're always the first to pull the permits and last to open up areas for New Mexicans. The Forest Service bans uh, uh, grazing because there's a possibility of the the jumping mouse in some forest areas. Never been a sighting of a jumping mouse, but they say it's the perfect environment for them. So they close off the streams to shoot an animal, especially the size of cow. Unless it's a perfect kill shot, that cow is going to be going wandering for days, weeks before they may finally fall. So you talk about the suffering. I ask PETA, I ask all of these animal right groups, where are you? Why are you silent on this? The most brutal way of actually killing an animal or treating an animal, the Forest Service is doing it and you remain silent on this. And that's appalling. We have an opportunity to fix a wrong here. Get with the Cattle Growers Association, get with the local ranchers that are up there. And I tell you, if you paid them X amount of dollars per head of cattle, it's going to come out an awful lot cheaper than flying that helicopter and paying for these hunters to go out there and take care of that. And we need to quit letting these so-called city experts determine the fate of our mountains like California did.
Yeah, so Defenders comes at it from the wildlife standpoint. As you probably know, these feral cattle have been an issue for about 2 decades or more at this point, and they're causing a lot of harm to the riparian areas and just the ecosystems in general. About cattle in general, they tend to trample the areas near rivers, which can cause erosion, and it reduces the amount of plant life in the near the waterways, and they can also cause like collapsing of burrows for small mammals and for snakes. So for us, it was we've always supported them removing the cattle, and this is something that's been in the works for a long time. They've done roundups in the past, and there was still at the beginning of this year, if my counts are correct, were about 250 cattle that were still up there. And just due to the location and the ruggedness It's unfortunately seemed like the best option. And again, from the wildlife standpoint, given all of the threatened and endangered species in the area, it was something that needed to be addressed. Yes, and a lot of the cattle, at least in the past, have been they've died on the way down when they've been round up. There's a lot of stress also involved in rounding up cattle as well.
It reflects that they are not going to take local input on certain operations within the Forest Service. Obviously, local community standards are not considered. You know, we do have rights. We have surface rights to that grass. We have surface rights to that property in our allotments, and it brings to question how secure are those rights. So obviously, when they took that grazing permit or grazing allotment that was there originally, they retired it when they went through bankruptcy. You know, if somebody would have been utilizing that allotment again, there would not be a feral cattle problem, because that person would be there working the problem every single day. And I think we are underestimated in the value farmers and ranchers have on our public lands. We were sending proposals in. We had not gotten to the point that we were listened to, I should say, you know. And so what we were all united in was that aerial gunning shouldn't be on the table. That's what we were all united in. You know, there's 550,000 acres in the Gila Wilderness area, and we're talking about 200 head of cattle on a place that would easily run probably close to 2,000. So it's not a major impact like they're talking. Yes, those herds are not being managed, but they're still migrating around, and it's all one big open pasture. You know, there's no subdividing it. So, and you know, part of the issue too is the Forest Service has not maintained the boundary fences to the wilderness in years and years and years. There is no contractor doing that for the Forest Service. So I guess, you know, if good fences make good neighbors, the Forest Service is kind of falling short on that measure.
About a year ago, not quite a year ago, there was some talk coming out of Grant County that the Forest Service wanted to do this, and we immediately reached out to the Grant County cattle growers. We met with at that time Director Christensen, the director of the U.S. Forest Service, in my office in DC. We were meeting her with my staff on several issues, but we asked her about this idea of going after these feral cows with a helicopter and shooting them. She absolutely had no idea about it and told our office that that would not happen on her watch. And really, I believe because of our communication with her, she ended up just putting the brakes on it, and therefore no one heard about it again. Then fast forward, she since retired. A new director, Director Moore, came into the U.S. Forest Service, and out of nowhere, the Forest Service local on the ground comes up with this idea that they were going to go back to this shooting the cattle from a helicopter. We learned about this on a Monday morning, and they were planning to execute their plan on Tuesday. All the stakeholders should have a say in this, and we should really make methodical decisions that really work for everybody. They were sent photographs of hoof prints in the Gila River, cow hoof prints. And I said, who sent them? They said a hiker, and we said a hiker with the biological, you know, Centers for Biological Diversity, and they said yes. So number one, that's the science we're talking about, photographs taken by a hiker from a special interest group. And that propelled them to, number one, take a helicopter into a restricted area, because this is a designated wilderness area. Unbranded cattle in New Mexico belong to the state. I myself personally extended an invitation to the new director to come to New Mexico and visit with all the stakeholders, with Lauren Patterson, with Karen Cowan, with myself, with some of the ranchers in the community, because we had given them some suggestions on how we could maybe move these feral cows off of this Gila by repopulating some of the allotments in the adjacent allotments that are empty. So when there is a cattle kill on a property by a wolf, the rancher is responsible at their own expense for removing the cow carcass, as to not entice other wolf kills in the area. Who went down to the Gila in a helicopter in a restricted area on wilderness and shot 60 something head of cattle and did not remove one of them. Now, they did go down and remove the 2 out of the Gila River, but they did not remove any of the cattle carcasses. So we've essentially set up a buffet for our wolves, who we already see that we have a major problem with, these predatory animals being given more rights than our ranchers. Now they've cut the herd of the Gosses down to 100 cows. That's death by 1,000 cuts, and that puts a rancher out of business in this state. There just seems to be no collaboration and no willingness on the side of the federal government to sit down and have honest conversations and really work together. And we should be protecting them, opening up the opportunities for them to do what they know how to do best, which is grow food. They do it right. All the people, in my opinion, that either live in or around our natural resources, live in or around our natural resource and use them for feeding cattle, for allotments, for oil, gas, for timber. These are the best stewards of our land. The uncertainty, not only in the country, but globally, we're really now being forced with having to see our food producers make those decisions of, is it worth it to grow food? Can they afford it between the costs of, fertilizers and feed? And I mean, whether they're raising beef cattle or if they're raising, a pen full of, pigs or chickens or whatever, or even a crop full of watermelons or onions or chili, just the expense of doing any of this right now, the uncertainties with weather, the last thing they need is a heavy-handed government who won't get out of the way and give them some leeway and trust the producers of American food to do what they know how to do and do it right. And I have every bit of trust in the American food producer, regardless if it's beef or coming out of a crop.
This instance, the ranchers called me regarding the concern that the feral cattle were being slaughtered via helicopter and sharpshooters, so that the concern is that also the carcasses were not being disposed of properly and being left in where they fell, and then creating issues with the predators. Concerns that we have, and it seems that the rangers had already had meetings to some of the policymakers about being able to round up the cattle and slaughter them, and then utilize the beef for use in possibly the school system. We have had concerns expressed to us by the stockmen about the overpopulation of wildlife, and especially elk, which are heavy animals, hardening the ground, not enough predators to be able to reduce that wild habitat. And like I said, people who have lived in those areas for centuries and generations have a good feel for what has worked for them in the past. So those are the concerns that we have with regard to this policy that could, possibly be replicated elsewhere. Not a good practice. So, well, that's an issue that has been brought to us by the Northern New Mexico stockmen about the reduction in, grazing allotment, especially for the Latino ranchers. A concern that we have expressed to the regional forester, but something that has not really been addressed. So we're concerned about that. We haven't had much success with the Forest Service with regard to some of those issues. But we continue to work on them, as long as they have concerns that we can take to the Congress, especially right now that we're working towards deliberations for the 2023 Farm Bill. That's very, very important to us to have the input of this, because they're a major component of our organization. Over 60% of our membership are stockmen.
You guys, we've been here way before the Forest Service was even created. I want to say that this 16 U.S. Code 480 stems from the Organic Act of 1897, so it has teeth. It's just that the Forest Service is not going to let you guys give any information that you can use against them. They never will. They'll keep you in the dark as much as possible. But when you attend our meetings with them, you need to have this piece of ammunition with you and challenge them where they get their authority. If you don't, then I guess you're going to let them manage you the way they've done in the past, showing that you have no respect and thinking you have no legal standing of any kind. The National Forest folks are not part of their jurisdiction. They don't own the National Forest. The only thing they have is the management of the timber. They have no other authority. The range, or the vegetation, the range, the wildlife, is just a presumed authority, or that they have jurisdiction over that. Folks, the other thing I want to mention is this whole deal of the Forest Service, and I talked about the permit number of permit holders, how many have lost their permit. That's cultural genocide, and it's been going on for a very long time, or since the 1940s that we're aware of. Those grazing permit that they issue to you, they have terms and conditions, folks, that are unachievable. You're set up for failure. And when you sign that permit, you're doomed. You only reps from all the counties in New Mexico to stand up and oppose the forest plans in the way they were written. We had countless meetings with them in this room. Did they listen to us? No. We've had experts from New Mexico State University attend these meetings. Did they listen to us? Did they listen to them? No. Why? We went from 2,200 permit holders to less than 1,000. Then in 2013, when the Forest Service tried to remove all the cattle from the Santa Fe and the Carson, or was it 2003? 2003. There they found out when the Range Improvement Task Force assessed the Forest Service records, they found out that we had gone from less than 1,000 to less than 600 permit holders. I'd like to see where we're at now. But anyway, they made it very, with those terms and conditions, and I'll give you an example of the terms and conditions. That one of the key components of that is that they want us to maintain a 4 to 6 inch stubble height throughout the grazing season. Well, it's impossible for the ranchers to do that by themselves because we have an elk population that is totally out of control. We'll never achieve. That's why I said those terms and conditions are unachievable. Just that's one example.
So there's rights attached to this land. But those signs that say public land, they should be removed because it's, first of all, it's on state land or state lease, on where the road goes.
And one is how Forest Service is ploy to change our culture. And for one, on the Rito Canijon area, we have changed our names of our canyons and our streams and our allotments. For example, we have a little canyon called Cholejo. They have changed it to Largo Canyon. Cañada Canijon is now Cano.
But I want to reiterate that in 2013, the Office of Civil Rights of the United States investigated the Carson and Santa Fe National Forest. And they put out a report called a compliance report in 2013. And this is, I'm reiterating already what Senor Salazar has said, but that report identified almost 40 different violations happening on the two forests. And it shouldn't be left out that that report was written by the Office of Civil Rights because they decided that their own agency was discriminating against Nuevo Mexicano ranchers. So how were they discriminating? They divided it into three categories. One was the reduction of permits. Not everybody's permits were being suspended or not renewed or taken away. The second category was that Nuevo Mexicano and Native American ranchers were being excluded from decision making. That report came out in 2013. Last month when we met with the Forest Service, they told us, hey, the decision has already been made to do these projects on a couple of different allotments. And they said, and we can't do anything about it, sorry you didn't know. But the decision was made by somebody that they just handed it to me, and now I have to implement it. So we did not get invited to go out and walk those streams. We had no part in that decision-making process 10 years after that Office of Civil Rights report. The third category in which the Forest Service was in violation of civil rights was in deficient data collection. So they were not collecting data that backed up the decisions that they were making on the allotments that Nuevo Mexicano ranchers own. We found out in the meeting last month that some of the data they're using is from the 1980s regarding the salamander, and the grazing restrictions that they want to implement come from data that was collected by environmental groups, not by the Forest Service. When we proposed to collect our own data, the Forest Service wrote us a letter saying they supported us, and then behind closed doors said, don't allow the ranchers to collect this data. Don't fund them to do it.
What I've seen is nothing but injustice with the Forest Service. My grandfather was a sheep herder. They broke him completely. And they've been sending our people on welfare. They stole our horses. They stole everything. 10 years ago, we had a reduction of 19%. That really affected our economy.
Once the elk were introduced, all this extra forage, that the cows will need, now they have to compete with the elk. And everything the rancher tries to say, whether it's down here in your winter range or up in the high country, your elk are on there first. Whatever, if it's a hay field you want to save for later on to graze your cows or putting a few cows, the elk take care of it before you get a chance.
Since the beginning of the Forest Service, right away they started crucifying our grandparents. And there's letters that were sent to the office, and I still have them in possession. Talking about what we're talking here today, they were talking, but they had no support, nobody helped them.
And they put the fear into the people from the get-go. And I'll elaborate a little bit more when they start changing names on maps, and they start taking away horse permits, and they start taking away sheep ranchers' sheep. How can we say they've been a good friend? They never have been.
And what we have is not a permit, it's a grazing right. And like Carlos mentioned, we own those grazing rights. And I haven't sold my grazing rights to the Forest Service. How can they claim it? If you discover, what you go back, these grazing rights were given to the people even before New Mexico was formed a state. Even before any government agency was formed. How can they belong to the Forest Service? That's what I want to find out. That's the question I want to ask.
The alcohol running rampant, and every time we have a meeting, you know, last 30 years, that we have a reduction, I ask our forest range con, whoever's sitting there, send that same letter to Game and Fish. I could write the book on all the excuses and how to change the conversation to something else.
Taos just got a huge monument, and basically it's an ability to reduce wood gathering, livestock use, access, and more access for recreation, but doesn't affect the 3% that sits in this room, which is the minority. But
you know, when we first started, this was supposed to be the land of many uses. And over here in Rico, we were supposed to be able to go hunting, fishing, gather wood, mining, and use the Forest Service, and we had agreements. But the agreements, we signed them, and then 2 or 3 years, or 5 years, or 10 years later, they don't mean anything anymore. And they keep just taking and taking and taking and taking all the power and leaving us with nothing.
And they said, okay, no more logging. They shut down the loggers, put your trucks away, you won't need them anymore. And they said, you can't cut any more wood, you can't do this, you can't do that. So what did they do? Under the 30-30 program, because it took root first in Oregon. And under the 30-30 program, they hired Chinese loggers to come in, and they clear cut. The other state was Idaho. They went into Idaho and they just cleaned house. And then they went to Oregon and they brought their lumber to Idaho. Where did the Idaho and the Oregon timber go? It went to China, they milled it, and they sold it back to us. And that's why you can't buy a 2x4 for less than 25 bucks.
And it's also the Federal Land Management Policy Act, which is the granddaddy of all the public land laws. Everything was consolidated, all the different public land laws were consolidated into the Federal Land Management Policy Act of 1976. In that particular law, all permits, plans, and other legal instruments are all subject to valid existing. Folks, we were all here way before the federal government acquired or started managing people. We were already here before the National Forests were created. And that 1897 Organic Act, where this 16 U.S. code stems from, we don't need further proof. We have it all. We have the writing on the wall. You can't tell the Forest Service, where do you get your authority?